This is the Mission Shaped Podcast. You're listening to The Author's Take.
Hi, my name is Tim Lee. I work for the National Fresh Expressions team. And on this Monday lunchtime, I welcome Kate Coleman into a conversation with me, the author, Kate. It is wonderful to have you here. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for your very kind invitation. Looking forward to our conversation.
No, brilliant. No, it's great to have you. Kate, we got to know each other because we invited you to come to a FX gathering, probably, what was it? Must be well over a year ago. It was March, wasn't it? And I remember at the time thinking I was slightly nervous because you got stuck in traffic. So I'm really glad that today you've not got stuck in traffic.
No, this is one of the easier ways to meet. For sure. I think when I arrived, I said to you, and I think I said to a few other people, did we improve your prayer life? Because, obviously we were stuck. We were supposed to start a particular time and we weren't there.
No, that's right. No, it was, it did improve my prayer life quite dramatically. So no. And I do remember that time when Kate and Cham, you came and you ministered and you talked and you told your stories, and it was just a really fruitful time. People still talk about that. So, and then I've got to know you because I put myself in a position where, if you like, you've ended up being a mentor to me, which I know I have incredibly appreciated over the last few months. So I've really got to kind of know you a little bit better. That has been just a real gift to me and incredibly helpful in terms of my own kind of leadership journey and leadership space. So
it's a huge privilege for me as well, to be honest. It's a good place to be.
Yeah, no, thank you. So tell us some fun fact about yourself or something that you love.
Well, probably the thing that I love, some people will know this, but something that I love, I'm in love with, is a guilty pleasure is my love for all butter shortbread biscuits. I love them more than is good for me. Shall I put it like that? So yes, I pretty much can't get enough of those.
Fantastic. Okay. So have you got any in the house at the moment?
It's not a good idea to have them in the house at the moment. Part of the problem is I've learned to bake in the last few years. So I can rustle them up if needed, which is also dangerous.
Okay.
So try not to keep them in the house. Get them as gifts. So that's a nice thing.
Fantastic. So this book that you have written, METAMorph, which is available if you want to go and buy it, nextleadership.co.uk/METAMorph. This book that you've written, which talks about transforming your life and leadership. And we're going to come on a little bit later to talking about leadership and how that works its way out. So tell us, what inspired you to write this book?
I guess the answer to that is, do you want the long or the short version? So it's
let's go for the long version.
Okay. It's quite a tale. So, let's say that in 2022, God got my attention and got my attention in a way that might not have been possible at any other time. And that's partly because 2022 was easily one of the most intense years of my life. That year, just about everything went wrong. I've had a few intense years, but just about everything that could go wrong pretty much went wrong. Life, work, ministry, relationships, family, everything was, and I was wondering why everything was falling apart. And I was feeling like I was falling apart. So that, there was death, there was bereavement, relational challenges in there. And out of seemingly nowhere in that same year, the height of the pandemic, my best friend Cham, as you know Cham very well.
Yeah.
And both of us found ourselves being fast-tracked into 5 mostly major surgeries between us. And we'd neither of us had ever been hospitalized before. So it was a major thing. And told we need to do this quickly. And then of course there was all the other stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
In the world, so there was the fallout from George Floyd. There was the multiple leadership failure things happening all over the Christian world. No part of the Christian world was untouched by that. And we're still seeing some of that. And then, of course, the church itself was struggling to pivot, so that was a new word for the church, and trying to pivot to face this so-called new normal. So I've had intense seasons, come and go in life, in leadership, but this one was a deluge of stuff, and it was coming at me from every angle. It was spiritually, emotional, it was physical, it was mental, it was material, it was financial. And, I often say to people, you couldn't have written it, but of course I did, so I got it into this book. It came out in this book. And I was really aware at that moment in time that, all around the world, the church, Christian organizations, had lost a lot of credibility due to issues of leadership. I know we're going to get onto that. But this was partly because of the kind of people we entrust with leadership, and also how we develop leaders and what we define as success. So all the stuff I'd been thinking about for years, the stuff I'd been writing about, stuff I'd been speaking about, started coming together in a way I had not ever experienced it. And it felt as if God had been preparing me to say something, and very specific.
Okay.
And, the specific thing was metamorph. And it was just a question of walking in obedience and writing this thing. But at the time, I also felt that other people would resonate with, because I think people were struggling to find language for something. And I started to write and felt that actually this might be the language lots of other people have been struggling to find, and this might really resonate. They might feel like, this is me. I believe that. So 2022 pretty much was I don't know, God's time, Kairos moment, for me.
So I'm fascinated by that. Because what we've got is this kind of a whole bunch of personal vulnerability circumstances that often in a way don't mean that people go and write a book, but it feels like it was something that was within you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I don't know. There's this whole idea that sometimes the fragrance that's in something, that something that is good that's in something doesn't get released without some sort of crushing or something. I had so much stuff going on. I dug into God in a way I don't know that I ever done before. And I value my relationship with God. So this was a whole nother level of something, and a whole bunch of stuff stopped. I had to stop.
Okay.
So I was listening. So that combination did something, opened something up.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Just so openly and so honestly. So tell us then, with you going through this crisis, with then you birthing this book, Metamorph, what are the main messages that for you this book talks about and speaks about?
So Metamorph is essentially, it's my shorthand for leaders who understand that transformation, and the transformation we desperately need in our communities, in our churches, in our nations, in our workplaces, in the world, can only come from a commitment to our own inner and outer transformation. A lot of what passes for leadership now is all about what you do on the outside. It's all about what you achieve and accomplish. But actually, I think that the Bible has a different message. So, metamorph comes from a word that we find all over the New Testament and all over the Bible, an idea that's all over the Bible.
Yeah.
And most Christians are very familiar with the word metanoia.
Yep.
And, we translate that as repentance. And metanoia is all about that ability to change our minds, to change our orientation, to change our understanding. And metanoia is a theme that's really important in leadership, because you have to stay open to new ways of thinking about things. But the word that many Christians are less familiar with, the other Greek word that most Christians are less familiar with in what I call the Christian metaverse, is metamorphosis. So metanoia and metamorphosis are our metaverse. That's what we should be paying attention to. But metamorphosis is all about transformation. And, when those people think of metamorphosis, they think of caterpillars turning into butterflies. That's the image. And it's the same idea for us. We're supposed to be one thing, changing into something fundamentally different. On the inside, metanoia, and the outside, metamorphosis. So in the Christian metaverse, if you like, it's impossible to have one without the other, but we often try to do one without the other. We often reduce metanoia to a mere change of opinion, and metamorphosis into making ourselves nicer, but they mean so much more than that. And we're not seeing the kind of metamorphosis that we should be seeing.
And I suppose, and in my own kind of thinking or understanding, it's this kind of whole thing about people being converted, and that's it. It's like there is nothing then after that. And it's, we talk down in the Christian world about the crisis of discipleship. And this, in a way, seems to be talking about what is that continuing process once we choose to follow Jesus.
Absolutely. So I think part of our challenge is when we think of conversion, as you've said, we think of it as a one-time thing. But conversion is supposed to be an ongoing process. I mean, that's the metanoia, this constant changing of our thinking, where we are constantly being, set in situations and circumstances that challenge us to either default to the old way of thinking, or have this metamorphic moment of transformation of our thinking and our behavior and the ways in which we are. And those can only come if we stay attentive to the fact that happens in every moment we get an opportunity. Every decision is an opportunity to demonstrate this metamorphosis, that we are actually becoming more like Jesus, or that we're actually abandoning that track and staying where we are. So, yeah.
And I suppose in a way, what that brings in is also then is that the element that this is not just in the kind of, want of a better way of putting it, in the Christian track. This actually is the whole of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely the whole of life. I think one of the things that's really excited me and encouraged me is that when people have come to the book who are not necessarily Christian believers, they may be people of other faith, or they may be people of no faith at all, they've got excited because they've said, actually, this is what leadership needs right now. This is what we all need, is this recognition that growth is, we're all growing. We're growing whether we like it or not. So, for example, we can choose to grow in a particular way. And even those who are not believers can do that. But for us as believers, we actually have a whole lot of help, and we have an end point. We know who we're growing towards and why we're growing in that direction.
And I find that interesting as well, because again, it's another there's another theological thing which goes off inside my head at that point about, so what is our Christology? How do we view Jesus?
Yeah.
And if you like, too often what we end up with a picture of Jesus is a being, God. And the last time I checked, that's spectacularly unhelpful for me because I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that there is this, I think one of the wonderful things about the description of Jesus in the New Testament is of this individual who, of course, is God, but that's not all Jesus is. Jesus has stepped into our reality, and you get this description of, he grew in stature, he grew in understanding of who he was, grew in understanding, there were those moments, yes, but we actually have somebody we can follow because he's taken our path of growth, development, change, transformation as well.
Yeah, the whole second Adam picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the cover of the book talks about a world being in desperate need, not just of leaders, but actually of Christian leaders who can navigate the complexity. And you talk about inspiring change. But to become those leaders, we must embrace the divine call to lead from our rootedness in Christ.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because it feels like that's kind of almost the crux of what seems to be going on here, is that both there's something within us and, talk a little bit more about that for us.
Yeah. So this idea that we lead out of something. Well, first of all, the idea that we lead, so we lead, and that actually that we're called to that. We're called to bring about some kind of difference, to make a difference that wouldn't have been made had we not stepped up into a space. So, but leading is always, and certainly for Christian leaders, and I think this is something that we need to understand in a new way. We are always in the second chair. Christian leaders are always followers. We're never anything else. We can't possibly be anything else. I remember saying to a group of leaders, political leaders as it happened once, that Christian leaders are not moved to bring about transformation. They're led. We are following. We're following our King. We're following our Lord. We're following Jesus. And therefore leadership comes out of that realization that we are constantly following. We're watching. What is Jesus doing? Where is Jesus at? What is Jesus saying? What should I then say? So that's partly why for me, the idea of leadership is not such a major stumbling block. I know it is for a number of others.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I think that word leadership, certainly I've been in some circles where actually it's got some serious baggage.
Yeah.
Good and or bad. And certainly in some circles, I've heard people say, well, we need to stop using that word and we need to stop, looking at that and developing leaders. I just wonder, and maybe I'd love to hear what you think about that, because it seems to be an integral part of what it is that you're talking about. What is leadership then?
Yeah, I mean, I understand why there are people who think that. I've been working in women's leadership for a long time.
Yeah.
And there are many women and men as well who really struggle with the idea of these words, leader, leadership, because of what it means to them, because of what it's become for them. Because they've seen so many poor examples.
Yeah.
And it's also true that the word leader is not a biblical word. So we could jettison it. It is possible to do that, but you are left with looking for a term that defines people or describes people or groups who do leadery things. And at the moment, we don't have a better one.
Yes.
We don't have a better one. And, leadery stuff is all over the Bible, so until we have a better way of describing it, and I have not come across it. I've heard people throw all sorts of things out. I've not come across it. I think leader works. It works well. Discipleship is another way of putting it, but that also has its problems because of the way it's been used or not used in the past. So until we find a better word, if somebody can come up with a better word, I'll change it. But right now, the idea of leader, we understand it and we can reinvest it with me. We can reclaim it. In the circles I move around in, lots of words get subverted and they get reclaimed and subverted. And I think this is one of those words that's ripe for reclaiming and subverting. So I don't think we need necessarily to toss it. I think we need to reinvest it with meaning, the right kind of meaning.
And that then fundamentally means that actually we have to change what it is that leadership look like, and the models that we have inside our head says a white, male, educated, over a certain age person in the context in which he finds himself. And that seems as though, and I know from my own kind of journey, changing that and living with that is really interesting.
Absolutely. There's a whole shift that needs to take place. And there is no problem being a white, whatever age, all of those things, male, all of those, there's no problem with that. It's just that that's not the only thing. I mean, leadership has been all about that in the past, but that's definitely not the biblical pattern. God chooses and uses all kinds of people, and we also need to broaden our expectation of who God might be wanting to work in and work through in leadery ways. And we also need to broaden our expectation of who we will be raising up, who will be encouraging, who will be creating space for. And all of that requires a shift in our thinking. Because as much as we do, I mean, both of us know this, but as much as we talk about discernment, I move across so many church contexts and, hear people talking about, we need to discern, who God might be raising up for leadership. But what people are actually doing is they're looking for types. They're often not engaged in the discernment process. They're looking for a type of person. And those people tend to look like them, Yeah. So we end up with lots of mini-me's rather than what God might actually be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is calling us to be Jesus shaped in whatever shape we are. Yeah. Yeah. No. Okay. So just tell me then, what was the of all the chapters that you've written in the book, what was the most meaningful chapter for you?
That is almost impossible to say because, I've written all of those chapters because they're all meaningful in some way. But at this moment in time, I would say the Esther chapter. So that's chapter 7. That's the chapter that's all about leading on purpose. And that's the chapter that's shouting the loudest to me right now. Because that chapter deals with 4 pivotal questions that help leaders to lead on purpose, and to lead out of their core identity. And I'm asking myself those 4 questions again. Why me? Why this? Why here? Why now? So those 4 questions are really resonating with me, and Esther's story is resonating with me in a whole new way, because her story is all about the act of risking it all. And I felt that writing was a bit like that. The timing fell off, the resources were insufficient, the energy was rock bottom. I knew I had some tough things to say, and I wasn't sure if I'd have the courage to say them. So I felt like I was in that place of Esther, if you don't say it, with Mordecai's in my ear, if you don't step up and do this thing, God will find somebody else, but you'll have missed something. And, so Esther definitely is the one speaking to me loud and clear for such a time as this.
Yeah. And those were, and it does seem as though we are in that space of more of Kairos time than Chronos time. Absolutely.
I feel that this season that we're in is a huge season of, if God has ever been wanting to do something, as we know, God is always wanting to do something, but it feels like this moment is packed full of possibility. It is that Kairos, as you've said, that time to act in certain ways, an opportunity to shift things in a way that they haven't shifted for a long time. They've kind of gone on. They've just gone on. But we have an opportunity to make a shift, a God-given, a God-intended, a God-desired shift. And we can say yes or we can say no. I want to be one of those who's saying yes. And that's partly why I wrote the book. I want to help other people to say yes too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No. I would echo from my own experience of spending time with you, then that's exactly what you encourage others to do, which is, So what do you hope readers will take away from reading Metamorph?
There are lots of things I hope for. Let me put that out there first. But I want readers, essentially, I want them to feel that they can partner with God to make something godly happen that wouldn't have happened if they didn't say yes to God. I want them to feel inspired to take the journeys they need to take towards that personal community and mission transformation. I want them to be encouraged by the biblical characters and by the scenarios, and to think that, wow, if God engaged them, maybe God will engage me, and maybe God can work through me. What I've tried to do with the book is to give some real practical practices and habits, things that we can inhabit and engage with, that welcome God, that enable God to do what God wants to do in and through our lives, so that this world can be a better place for those who follow.
So if you like what you're saying, then is this book is just not another book on leadership. It's not about knowledge. Actually, it is about fundamental change in who we are.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things I say over and over again, and it's not that knowledge isn't important, it's just that we have focused so much on that. We've crammed people full of knowledge and have believed that somehow filled with this knowledge, they would be transformative. We know that does not happen. And, you know, the evidence is all around us. That does not happen. What we need is wisdom. We need good judgment. We need the ability to intuit and understand, not just with our minds, but with our hearts. We need to grasp that transformation comes to us in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and comes to other people in that way too. The amazing things is that Jesus didn't take people through a 3-year curriculum in order to, to turn them into leaders. Well, actually, he was around for 3 years and they were with him for 3 years, but it wasn't the kind of knowledge base that we are so fond of in the Western world. Yeah. And there are people who have been leading ever before leadership and the idea of leadership and the whole theory around leadership was a thing. There have been people leading for forever, for generations, in all sorts of setups, who can read and write and who can't read and write, and who are wise leaders. So we're certainly missing something with our whole focus. Let's cram people full of information and hope they do better.
Kate, thank you. I've read most of the book, and I remember thinking, I need to take more time. And what does this mean for me? My good friend Simon Goddard, who works for the Fresh Expressions team as well, has actually sent out a challenge to people, and he will be running a book club on Fridays for people to discuss what it is. If you know Simon and you want to connect with that, then you can find Simon on Facebook or through his company Rivertree. But again, what he's offering is an opportunity for people to go deeper and to dig more into what it is, and what a difference it might make. So the book itself is available from your website, Next Leadership /METAMorph, or you can buy it through any good local bookshops, and you are actively encouraging people to do that rather than necessarily to use some rather large multinational organizations. So if you can buy it through your local bookshop, then please, we would really encourage you to go and do that. Kate, thank you.
Thank you.
For your time, for your vulnerability, for your wisdom, for sharing with us in this time. We really appreciate it. The recording of this will go up on the FX website and on YouTube over a period of time. So hopefully we'll be encouraging, we will certainly be pointing people towards it to continue, I think, the very real challenge, but also a really incredibly insightful challenge that you've laid down to so many of us within the church. So thank you for your time today. And look forward to continuing the journey. Yeah. It doesn't feel like this is an end. It feels like this is partly a beginning.
Sounds good to me.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to dig a bit deeper, there's loads over at freshexpressions.org.uk. Things like Godsend, our toolkit for starting new Christian communities, plus loads of other resources, worship ideas, and real-life stories. You'll also find info about the gatherings we run throughout the year, books and resources in our shop, coaching and training for pioneers, and for the leaders across denominations, dioceses, and networks. You can sign up to our newsletter, follow us on our socials, or find out how to support and partner with us. It's all there on the website. Go take a look, freshexpressions.org.uk.